Giles Bettison, thanks for your time. We're here at the Abstract Nature exhibition at the Samstag. Tell us a little bit about the technique that you use to create your glass works, this Venetian style of marine.
Marini is a word that was invented in Italy about 150 years ago to describe small little glass tiles that were used to decorate furniture or walls or to melt together to make little glass objects or vessels and stuff like that. And the word was, I think, invented in Italy. And so it just describes little tiles that are made out of glass by a process of drawing down coloured glass into small shapes that are then snapped up or broken up into the tiles. And what I do with the little glass tiles, well, I make them myself and then melt them together to form objects like this or vessels.
And how did you come to take it on as a technique?
I was taken with hot glass working as an idea by watching friends of mine who were glass blowers, and I was intrigued by the material and the process and stuff like that. Went to art school, and while I was at art school, well, one thing that I didn't understand very well about hot glass, or one thing I thought was a little lacking, was perhaps that some graphic possibilities weren't there so much. Anyway, while I was at art school, I saw a couple of American artists tour. They worked here in Adelaide and they worked in Sydney and Melbourne and also in Canberra where I was studying. And one guy who's a master glass worker from the Washington state, Richard Marcus, uses this Marini technique a lot, and he learnt it when he was on a Fulbright scholarship in the island of Murano in Venice, working in the Vanini factory. So he'd learned it from Italian guys, and he was using it, and I saw him do it, and instantly the realm of possibilities opened up to me as far as graphic possibilities in blown glass forms and stuff like that. So, and that was 1993, I think, the end of 93 I saw him, and from there on in, that's pretty much what I've focused on.
I'm interested in how the view of nature gets conceptualised into an outcome like such as your works. Now, these works, I understand, come from experiences camping out on the Gibbard Plains in far north of South Australia. How does one camping, and viewing those things conceptualise those visions with outcomes such as these?
Well, I think there's a huge amount of visual experiences that you can have in the landscape or in your life walking around. But certainly these pieces, which are from central and northern South Australia, or inspired from things I saw there. I mean, the landscape up there is quite incredible. It's very strong, and it's very well, it always makes a big impression on me, and I think anyone that travels through it, it makes a big impression on. So there's that kind of experience, and I mean the visual possibilities of being out of all of the stuff in the landscape, the colours and all the dynamics and stuff are amazing. And then I guess, I mean, all through South Australia there's some really subtle experiences that you can have visually in the landscape, to some really quite stark ones in the further north you go. And the landscape for me became a way of me sort of understanding feelings I've got about different places and different times, and perhaps my own history.
So tell us a little bit about these two pieces that you've done, just sort of a little bit about what they represent, and secondly, the technique to get there.
Well, this piece is titled Gibbard Plain, and about 7 or 8 years ago I used to drive up the Oodnadatta track a lot and up past Williams town. William Creek, that's right, past William Creek and stuff, and you come past a couple of big flint hills and you come into this area that's called Gibber Plain, and it's basically a bunch of red dirt with a lot of fist-shaped to football-sized red stones strewn across it. And anyway, I came to this place and it looked really kind of uninviting, but it fascinated me, and it was getting to the end of the day, so I stopped to put my swag down, and as the sun started going down, the landscape became more and more dynamic, because the rocks started throwing these shadows that became longer and longer, and the sun sort of hitting the ground and the rocks at the angle made everything, the red and orangey colour, get brighter and brighter, and then the shadows got longer, and it became quite intense thing. And then I also noticed the same thing in the morning when the sun was coming up. There were these big long shadows past, well, it was dark, and then all of a sudden the sun popped over the horizon, and then this light sort of spread everywhere, but there was these long shadows that gradually grew shorter and shorter. And this piece is about that. So as you move across, looking at the piece, there's little pieces of blue, and as you move across, they sort of spread longer and longer. So they're kind of like my shadows that I've put the little things. And so in a sense, it's kind of a literal thing, but it's also just an interesting sort of visual composition, I think. And this piece is a great sandy desert, which was from a series of photographs that I took out of an aeroplane when I was, shortly after I graduated art school. I had an exhibition in Germany, and so I caught an aeroplane, and at that stage there was an airline that flew from Adelaide to Vienna, and they flew straight across the Great Sandy Desert. And so I took a bunch of photographs out of the aeroplane on the way to Germany, and there'd been a bunch of rain up there at that stage, and so there were quite big puddles down between the rows of the sand dunes, and the sand dunes sort of run all east-west for hundreds of miles, I guess, and then between them there was these puddles of water, and they were reflecting the sun or the sky or the edge of the sand dunes, and it was again a really dynamic sort of red landscape. And so both of the pieces, the Great Sandy Desert and the Gibber Plain piece, are solid glass that are made out of sections of glass rods that I've made with patterns embedded, or patterns in the glass rods. The Great Sandy Desert piece has some quite large pieces of glass rod that have sort of clear windows through the middle, and some of those windows go all the way through the piece, and some of them just are on the surface. And then the space in between is sort of taken up with other little patterns. And these are all constructed out of sheet glass or other types of coloured glass that I've manipulated when they're hot and molten on the end of a metal rod, and formed into these shapes, and then stretched and then cut and fitted together and assembled. And after making all the little rods, I kind of have the composition drawn up and then lay it out in a big oven and try to match everything up so that there's as few gaps as possible, and then melt it in the oven until it all fuses into one solid block. And then I take after that's happened, there's a very long cooling process. I think they took about a week and a half to cool down or something like that. And then after that, I cut the shapes into them and ground and polished the surfaces and finished the edges and stuff. And with the Gibber Plain, there was basically one style of pattern, or one or two styles of patterns that I used to make up the rods, which I then dripped all together and then melted into a block, and then cut and carved and ground and polished into the shape that you see there. So it's a very complicated and quite time-consuming technique, and with a lot of different stages in the process, and each different stage produces a different opportunity for it to go wrong. So the hotter the glass is at the stage that you're at, the more likelihood that you could make a mistake and have to start again. But there might be 15 different stages in each, separate stages in the making of each of these pieces.